That was the background. I went and made sure my door was properly shut.
Thank you, Anthony. Welcome to another Sunday. Oh wait, it's not Sunday at all. It's Wednesday. To a Wednesday Superversive live stream. I'm your host Ben Wheeler, and I am here with my co-host Anthony Marchetta and John C Wright, the Grandmaster, the illustrious, the only author with a beard better than mine. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing very well, thank you for having me.
Excellent. There is, of course, a lot to talk about today, but perhaps, a victory over abortion will be in our future, and I have invited you to discuss that, as well as quite a few other subjects related to it. I guess the place to start, good afternoon, DJ Scheffler, would be the leaks themselves and the information provided by them.
Well, we have heard from Chief Justice Roberts that the leak is a legitimate document. It's a draft that's been circulated within the court since February. And the first thing I want to say about it, which is something that you've probably heard by now from many sources, is uh, this is a shocking betrayal of trust on the part of whoever leaked it. And
Hmm.
the mere fact that I cannot bring to mind any other time in our history when this has been done uh, simply makes me flabbergasted. I went to law school. I'm an attorney. At least I was before I allowed my bar membership to lapse. And although lawyers, deservedly so, have a reputation for sharp dealing and sneakiness and criminality, there's certain things that we tend not to overstep, certain lines that we won't cross. And this is one of them. And if your standards, I mean, lawyers have a standard below that of used car salesmen in terms of double dealing, in terms of being unscrupulous. So the most unscrupulous group in the nation has certain things we don't do. And yet now, this time, because it was so important to our friends on the far left, this time the line was crossed. I guess you can mock me if you wish, and I would certainly deserve it. But it's like finding out that the Nazi prison guard cheats at cards. You might have thought, oh, it's bad enough he's a Nazi prison guard. I mean, how can you get worse than that? But if it's the first time you ever heard him cheat at cards, you'd go, gee, Fritz, what I thought you were loyal to the fatherland and everything. It's actually shocking to me. And I'm surprised at myself. Surprised because I'm so cynical. I thought I could not be shocked. I thought that there was no lower place to which the enemy would not stoop, and yet they stooped away and just they surprised me again. They surprised me again. The thing released, the reason for the leak was to stir up a violent mob in front of the courthouse. And please note that it was highly organized. It showed up instantaneously with pre-printed signs within 24 hours during a time of night when none of the justices or clerks was there. So the crowd gathered in front of an empty building except for a few guards and yelled and screamed and chanted. Our friends on the left love chanting.
Hmm.
And because I mean the if you're depriving Moloch of his human sacrifices of the blood of innocent children, he's angered, and his servants are angered. And uh, this this was the real insurrection, not what happened on January 6th. This was an attempt to use force to overthrow the workings of the government. It is one of the
Absolutely.
most pathetic and hideous displays I have seen in my lifetime, and we've seen a lot of pathetic and hideous things recently, and this just takes the cake. This just takes the cake. Having said that, I hope that their attempt to intimidate the court fails because this decision is long overdue. I read the opinion when it was released, and I was convinced from the get go that it was not a forgery, that it was actually authentic. And this is even before Justice Roberts confirmed it was authentic, because the legal reasoning in the opinion is so crisp and so clear and so lawyerly and so on point. I'm actually I'm agog like a fanboy over Justice Alito and how lawyerly he is, how logical, how he addresses every argument in a methodical fashion and dismantles it quite happily and quite thoroughly.
Hmm.
So let me start my start. Let me continue my diatribe unless you interrupt me with a personal note. My first day in law school, the first case I read was this case. It was handed out to us during orientation. And it is, no matter how anyone feels about the actual issue itself, whether you think abortion is a woman's right to choose, or whether you think abortion is the devil killing children, no matter where you fall on the question, the actual legal method, the legal reasoning in the decision is the poorest of any decision in the Supreme Court that I have ever read. Because every other Supreme Court opinion, I don't know if you guys have ever read any, I've read a lot. Every other opinion is like reading a proof in mathematics, something from Euclid, where you say a line of a proposition, then you quote precedent. You quote what prior cases support that point. Then you quote a line against the position. Then you quote precedent to see what prior cases are against that point. Then you try to reconcile the position to see where justice lies. You argue both sides, and you quote every paragraph. Note what previous writing you're resting on for your case. If you quote an authority like Blackstone or some other acknowledged legal authority, you quote that as well. This allows any other judge reading your opinion who wants to be guided by your opinion, it's called precedent or stare decisis, to look up what you're resting on to see if you've correctly decided it. See?
Right.
Even the Dred Scott case, which many people regard as the most shameful in our nation, I'm sorry, had much clearer legal reasoning than the Roe v. Wade case. The Roe v. Wade case quoted no prior cases. 0. Not one. It quoted no language from the Constitution. Not a syllable. Not a jot, not a tittle, not the small dot over the J, the lowercase
Right.
J. It quoted no legal authority, not Blackstone, not anyone. Okay? It quoted no state constitution showing that it was a right that had been recognized by any other governmental body. It quoted no legal opinions. It quoted nothing. It's not the way the law is supposed to work. The law is supposed to work with the legislature legislates the law. They make it up. The judges interpret the law. They interpret the law based on precedent. They interpret the law based on previous interpretations. So you have a body of interpretation going back to the 12th century and older, to continental law, to biblical law, to the Bronze Age of laws based on prior laws, of cases based on prior cases, so that every reasonable man can know how to behave in order to conduct himself according to what the law means.
Right.
See how simple the system is?
The Sumerians would, of course, write there on stone and bind them in clay pottery so that they wouldn't perish from the earth, and every man could look upon them if he were literate.
Correct. Now, the argument given in the case of Roe v. Wade was basically that this. It said that while there are certain rights enumerated in the Constitution and clearly protected by the Constitution, there's another general right called a right to privacy, which can vaguely be deduced from one or several different phrases in the Constitution. And that this right to privacy also extends to a right to kill a baby in the womb. Now, in a later decision called Casey, the court relied on the 14th Amendment to say that if no person can be deprived of a right without due process of law, any right which was part of our traditions or which was an innate, built-in part of our ordered system of liberty had to also be protected by the 14th Amendment. And the argument was made that the right to kill your unborn child is a right that was built into our ordered system of liberty from the get-go. Now, Justice Alito, in his decision here, goes through that argument step by step and points out that no, the abortion has been illegal since the first century in a document called the Didache. It's been illegal in the Middle Ages and later. Some jurists made a distinction between when the baby was quickened and when it was not. Quickened was if you can feel the baby moving in the womb. Okay, but even those people did even those distinctions between a quickened and an unquickened baby was not to say what the penalty would necessarily be better, greater or smaller for performing an abortion. It was to say whether or not it was detectable as a crime, because you couldn't if you couldn't tell the woman was pregnant, you couldn't tell if you couldn't tell the baby was alive, you couldn't lay an action at lawsuit or at criminal law. Does that make
Right.
sense? So at the
It's
time the 14th Amendment was written, uh, 3/4 of the states had already had laws on the books illegalizing abortion, sometimes with the same penalty as homicide. Okay,
Mhm.
they all adopted the common law principle, saying that if a woman died during an abortion attempt, you were guilty of murder, because the illegality of the abortion attempt itself uh, was attributed as your intention to the death of the woman. Does that make sense?
It does.
In law, you could argue that you didn't intend to kill the woman when you gave her some concoction that was supposed to kill her baby, but the English common law said nay, said if you're trying to kill a baby and you kill a woman by mistake, that's the same as shooting at one guy and hitting another. Okay, the fact that you meant to kill one person and hit the second person meant that you still had the mental state, the malice of forethought necessary to be held guilty of the murder.
Mm.
So even from the time beyond reckoning, the time in which the memory of man runneth not to the contrary, uh, abortion has always been unlawful. At the time when Roe v. Wade itself was decided, all 50 states had laws either restricting abortion or outlawing it. And I believe 30 states outlawed it entirely for all stages of pregnancy at that time. But Roe v. Wade was not rectifying a right like the right to free speech or the right to practice religion or the right to peaceably assemble or the right not to have soldiers quartered in your home or any other right recognized by the Constitution. It was legalizing and codifying something which had always been against the law. And certainly you cannot hide behind the 14th Amendment to affirm it.
Right. So, just to summarize, there has been a body of law that is quite developed, quite
Ancient.
advanced, ancient, about abortion laws and abortion sort of practices, um, that can be called upon to establish precedent as well as reasonable conduct on the part of the public.
The conduct has to a law has to tell a person obeying the law what he has to do to be in obedience with the law. That's
Yes.
why the law courts are structured the way they are.
Mm,
Which means you can't just suddenly up and change it without a legislative act.
right. And it was, everyone could know that the law was no abortion, or
Yes,
something similar.
right. It wasn't like a right to free speech. This alleged right to kill your baby is not like a right to free speech, which we've always had under English common law.
Mm,
Even before the American Revolution, the English themselves didn't have it written down in the Constitution because they don't have a written Constitution. But since the time of the Magna Carta, they've had such things where you were not able to be, your speech was not able to be squelched without at least some due process of law.
Magna
Let me read
Carta,
you,
was
if I
that a?
may, since I love this guy, since I love this writing, let me read you the passage from the very beginning, very first page of this opinion, confirming what I just told you. Here, this is Justice Alito's words.
Mm,
At the time of Roe, 30 states still prohibited abortion at all stages. Means all stages of pregnancy.
yes.
In years prior to that decision, about a third of the states had liberalized the law, but Roe abruptly ended that political process. By political process, of course, he means democracy. He means you getting a vote on the laws that govern you. It imposed on the nation the same highly restrictive regime as on the entire nation, as it effectively struck down the abortion laws of every single state. As Justice White aptly put it in his dissent, the decision represented a raw exercise of judicial power. It sparked a national controversy that has embittered our political culture for half a century.
Yes.
So and he just goes on. The other arguments in favor are, for example, that women don't have a sufficient power in the vote to allow this decision to go to a democratic vote. And he points out that first, a court of law cannot make a decision based on that point. If that's your point, you have to go to a legislature about it. And second, that's simply not true. More women vote than men do, statistically speaking, these days. Okay. And the idea that you have a due process right to kill a child is simply absurd on its face.
Absolutely, without question. So with your mentioning of the Dred Scott case, sort of reminded me that most of the time I don't actually hear any legal arguments for or against Dred Scott of the laws of the time.
Well, here's the holding of the Dred Scott case, which I feel a little bad about, because almost everyone regards that case as horrible.
I mean, it happened in St. Louis. I've heard about it.
In the Dred Scott decision, what the court said is that the slaves that were enslaved at the time when the Constitution was made were not in the contemplation of the authors at the time when they wrote the document to be liberated by that document. That was not what the decision was. And so they said, we as the court, we as the Supreme Court, do not have the authority to change the constitutional structure. They basically said, if you want to free the slaves, vote on it. And so they said, Dred Scott himself, although he's a man, is not one of the people that the Constitution, whose rights are guaranteed by the Constitution.
I getcha.
Now, I think it's a horrible decision, but I think the legal principle on which it was decided is a sound principle, which is the Supreme Court can only do what the Constitution says the Supreme Court can do. You can't make new law. You can't change the constitutional order.
Right. And
you can't change the laws of all the southern states, even if those laws are wicked and are against the will of God. They're not a religious body. They're the judicial body. So
excellent.
Now, compared to that, that's often held up as the worst Supreme Court case of all time. Compared to that, that is a gem of legal reasoning compared to the complete absence of legal reasoning in Dred Scott. I got to tell you, I have to emphasize yet again, when I was a first-year law student reading that case, and I said there is not a single quote here in support of any of these propositions. They're simply making it up out of whole cloth. And I said to myself, if I turned this in to any one of my professors at this school, I would be flunked out. I cannot believe that any practicing lawyer wrote that paper, much less a judge, much less a Supreme Court judge, much less several of them, the majority of them, putting their chop on this. It was outrageous and continues to be. And that's just from the legal point of view. From the moral point of view, of course, I think that killing people is wrong unless, as we are allowed under the laws of Texas, he needed killing. And of course, no little baby ever needs killing. So I'm kidding. There's not actually a law that says you can kill people in Texas if they need it. It's more like a custom than a law.
Marshall, did you ever kill an innocent man? I have never met a man who was innocent.
The other thing that Justice Alito in his decision points out, and this is even more horrible from my legal point of view, is once you make a bad decision at law and you step away from the normal principles you use for deciding laws and deciding what cases to strike down and what cases to uphold, principles such as, for example, reading the document in the light of the original intent of the writer. For example, it's called originalism. Such as the decision to defer to the legislature when at all possible. Okay, certain other principles of legal reasoning and of legal interpretation. Those all went by the wayside slowly, one at a time over the years. Every time any Roe v. Wade related case came up for examination. In the case of Casey v. Planned Parenthood, which Alito also talks about in this opinion, the High Court ignored the rule that the court in Roe v. Wade had made up. The court in Roe v. Wade had said that there is the woman has an interest or a right to kill her child. The state has a right to protect what it called potential life. I myself do not know as a lawyer what the term potential life means, nor do I know it as anyone who as a scientist or even as a science fiction writer. Because the thing is either alive or it's not. I don't know what it means to be potentially alive. But in either case, the court in Roe v. Wade said during the first trimester, the states can govern and modify the states have no right to interfere with the woman's interests, and they identified infanticide as something that was a protected interest. That in the middle trimester, the two interests had to be evenly balanced, had to be weighed against each other. In the final trimester, the state actually had an interest in preserving potential life, and therefore could regulate the behavior of baby killers and of abortion laws. Okay. In Casey, they said, no, that's not the standard we use for deciding what's lawful or unlawful under the Roe v. Wade precedent. The new standard is if it forms an undue burden on the woman, then the law cannot go through. But the court didn't say what constituted a due as opposed to an undue burden. You see?
Yes.
And that standard was simply invented out of whole cloth by the Casey court, ruling on a decision by the Roe v. Wade court, where their first three trimester, their viability standard, was also simply invented out of whole cloth. None of them were based on any prior law. None of them were based on any written law. None of them were based on any act of Congress. None of them were based on any state constitutions. None of them were based on any legal authority. None of them were based on any legal commentary like Blackstone or Cook. Okay? It's just all made up out of the ether, made up out of nothing. And consequently, other courts of law trying to interpret and enforce these standards can't do it because no one can say what's an undue or a due burden. What if you just asked the abortionists to abide by the same restrictions that apply to someone who is removing a wart? I can't open a wart removal therapy house in my backyard and simply start anesthetizing people and taking a knife to them. I need some sort of licensing for that. Okay, I can't put anyone under gas. I can't give anyone nitrous oxide and knock them unconscious and work on them and then wake them up again without some sort of public medical board saying that I know how to do that without killing people, right?
Right.
But if I'm removing a baby and not a wart, then suddenly, if it's considered an undue burden on the woman, I am no longer bound by the same rules that apply to every other medical procedure in the history of the universe. Because what does the undue burden test mean? It means nothing. It means whatever the judge at the moment says it means.
Well, it means that those impoverished areas will be more, shall we say, encouraged to be promiscuous and to perform destructive acts because the consequences are removed.
I beg to differ. You are assuming a certain amount of practical reasoning, which is alien to the legal mind. We don't judge undue burdens based on the undue burden of the individual, of which woman is more or less burdened by it, because then we would have to determine your income before determining when and how to enforce the law. Instead, we just determine if in general the burden is undue. See?
I understand.
Now, please note that my other rights have no such restrictions on them. The state does not have to prove that it's an undue burden of me to exercise my right to bear arms for me to bear arms. They don't need to prove it's an undue burden of me to speak freely before my right to freedom of speech is upheld. You see? In those cases, the courts have always either widely deferred to the individual right, or not taken the burden into account. even when certain laws concerning gun laws, for example, are enacted merely to burden the gun owner, merely to make it difficult for him to own firearms or to own certain types. So that test is not used for any other constitutional right. Only this one, this so-called one, which, God willing, if this opinion is not changed, if this draft goes through, is not going to be considered a right any longer.
So I watched Razor Fist's excellent video about it. He said that there were bans since 1816. If I'm recalling correctly, on abortion, with this theme of legislating from the bench, which happened to homosexual marriage, which happened to a whole bunch of other things. But homosexual marriage is the big one because we actually voted against it, and they said no.
We voted against abortion too.
Of course. Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think this will hurt the Supreme Court's power to legislate from the bench? Or at least put a chink in its armor?
No. Because the Supreme Court's power to legislate from the bench has always been unlawful. And if the vote tally from the draft opinion is accurate, is correct, there's still 3 justices on the Supreme Court, or 4, that believe that Roe v. Wade is good law. In order to believe that, you have to believe that a Supreme Court justice can commune with the universe and deduce the emanations of a penumbra of a general legal principle that can be formed into a right by his act of will in some sort of gnostic, mystical manifestation incarnating something from nothing. I mean, it's like a virgin birth without the Virgin Mary. You just, the lawyer by himself really creates the right out of, like I said, out of the ether. The only way to curtail the abuse of power, I hate to say it, is to be very careful about what judges you put on the bench, and to impeach or punish those who go against that principle. If the Supreme Court were to chide or upbraid or censure every lower justice or judge in the federal system, the lesser courts would follow their lead. But the Supreme Court itself, since it's a co-equal branch of government, the only way to ensure that we have less judicial activism is merely by appointing non-activist judges. Now, having said all that, I have to point out that if this opinion goes through as stated, it does severely criticize justices legislating from the bench, and therefore any judge willing not to legislate from the bench, any judge arguing on that side, will have more ammunition to quote on his side of the argument. He'll be able to quote this case as precedent, operating against that. So, in a typical lawyerly fashion, I'd like to say both yes and no to the question.
Thank
yes,
you.
I think it will not necessarily affect it will not necessarily affect the willingness of the enemy to be unlawful, because unlawfulness is the core of far leftism. But it will form a precedent for anyone who is willing to honor precedent. But if you're willing to honor precedent, you're not an activist judge anyway. That's what an activist judge is. It's someone who departs from precedent to make new law without waiting for the legislature.
I get you. What do you, let's say that it is fully defeated, and it is thrown from Olympus, like Hephaestus. What other laws would...
Hephaestus lived, burned to ash like Semele.
There we go. I like it. I like that better because it's ashes. What other laws, like what ripple effects do you foresee through the legal system, besides what's already mentioned?
I'm a lawyer, but I'm not really a good judge of character. I'm not really a good judge of what legally is possible and is not possible. Because while gay marriage is also clearly an unlawful power grab by the Supreme Court, it's just as arbitrary. It's just as foolish. Okay, it's just as unlawful from a legal point of view but it doesn't have that diabolical, nauseating buckets of blood effect that the millions of dead babies have on our cultural psyche. You see,
Right.
most Americans, for better or for worse, are fairly laid back. And if two sons of Ganymede want to go off and pleasure themselves in private without grooming our children, without approaching our children, most Americans, whether wisely or unwisely, will let them be. Will not make a big issue out of it. Will not make a big fuss out of the deal. We're Americans. We'd rather just make stuff and sell each other stuff, okay? And your money is as good as anyone else's. But when they start approaching your children, it triggers something very deep in the human psyche. It triggers every mother's innate maternal instinct and every father's innate smash his face instinct. We call the paternal protective instinct.
Mm.
Well, aborticide is very similar to that. Abortion strikes at the very core of the human psyche. We only form civilization to protect families. You can't have civilization without families. Families are to protect the young. We're an outrichial species. We don't lay our eggs in the sand like sea turtles. We have to rear our young for at least 13 years, maybe 18, okay? To have a law that directly contradicts that makes the Aztecs look civilized compared with us. Because the Aztecs shed all that blood in their steaming pyramids of Mexico covered with blood in order to keep the sun lit up, in order to get good crops. They were doing it for the good of the community. What are the abortionists doing this for? What are the mothers doing it for? For their own convenience? For their own incompetence? As a type of retroactive birth control? What's the social good? What good does it do to wipe out 1/4 of the black population? Unless you think the blacks are an inferior species that needs to be wiped out. Thank you, Margaret Sanger.
I
No
was
leftist
about
I
to
know is
mention
willing
her.
to admit that. No leftist I know is willing to admit that in public. They're not willing to say, yes, what we want to do is wipe out the blacks, and we want to do it in a way that is peaceful, so no one notices what we're doing.
Mm.
That's why 3 out of 4 Planned Parenthood abortion mills are set up in ghetto areas, set up in poor areas,
Yes.
try to get the minorities to welcome into their doors.
It
And
is.
let me tell you, the Christians are never going to let this issue go. Even if it doesn't happen this time, we will keep fighting this forever. We believe that man is made in the image of God, and that a little baby contains God's image, and you can't destroy it, not for your own convenience, not even to keep the sun lit. Okay?
Yes.
Now, gay marriage we also have a problem with, because of course we believe man was made in the image of God and was made man and wife, for they're made to reproduce. But even an atheist has to admit that sex is sex for a reason, and that it exists for a purpose, and that our laws are meant to protect it for a purpose. You see, the
Yes.
thing that has not happened with gay marriage, which I as a lawyer thought would happen, I thought the precedent of saying that gay marriage could be marriage would have immediately legalized polygamy in Utah, and immediately legalized any other possible arrangement of cohabitation or mutual masturbation that you can imagine. And that didn't happen yet. So it kind of surprised me. What I was not expecting once gay marriage went through was to use the law to try to illegalize the distinction between male and female. And that actually took me by surprise. So like I said, I'm not good at predicting politically where these things will go based on what the high court does.
Right.
But it does give me hope that gay marriage will be removed from the list of impositions by the court. If I am a Republican, I'm willing to live in a republic. I'm willing to abide by the decision of the majority in such cases, even if I just think they're wrong. But I am not willing to abide by the decision of 5 out of 9 lawyers who are making something up. It's not in the document we all agreed to. It's not in the laws we all agreed to. The whole point of our system of government is it's based on the consent of the governed. The previous form of government, monarchy, was based on the idea that God Almighty appoints the monarch and grants him the sovereign power in order to enforce divine will on earth. The kingship was supposed to be kind of a sacred thing, similar to a priesthood. But by that theory of government, you can't have abortion or gay marriage either. Now, here's what delights me in the screaming and carrying on of the left when they heard about this opinion. They immediately said, "Oh, if you grant children a right to live, if you grant the right to life to small children or to unborn children, that's Nazism. They're going to take away all the other rights." Now, they correctly said we might come after gay marriage next, which I hope we will. But I don't think that's as hot button an issue politically. I don't think that is as offensive to the human spirit as a mother killing her own child. I look at it this way. There's a certain hierarchy of how bad things are. For one man to murder another is bad. For a man to murder his own brother is the sin of Cain. For a woman to kill her own children is the crime of Medea. And whether or not Cain and Abel got along or didn't get along, at least Abel could have, picked up a stick or something to defend himself when Cain came after him. He wasn't helpless, and he wasn't. If anyone kills my child, that's a bad thing. If my wife kills my child, and I, as the father, have no voice in the matter, that takes away from me my primary role in life as a father. The father's primary role is to protect the wife and kids. We're supposed to protect our dependents. Okay?
Yes.
The mother's primary role in life as a mother is to support and sustain her child and rear them. Aborticide betrays all parts of the human family. It makes the father unable to protect the young. It makes the mother unable to sustain the young. And the baby doesn't get a vote. He just gets his organs harvested for money. I tell you, the Aztecs are going to look good compared to us on Judgment Day.
Yes.
I find.
Go for it, Anthony.
Thank you. I find it interesting that you use the term the sin of Medea, because I know not
I
that
said
I'm
the crime of Medea. I did not say the sin of
crime.
Medea.
I'm sorry, my mistake. Yes, legally, that's actually an important distinction in this case, since we're talking legality here. But the crime of Medea, because I know, not that I'm an expert in the Medea myth or anything like that, but I do know a little bit about it to know that they have been trying to excuse Medea's crimes since just about they came up with the original story. It is not a new...
Who's been trying to excuse Medea's crimes? The witches?
So there's
Who?
been a feminist retelling of the Medea story that is almost as old as the original Medea story, where Medea is recast as the victim of the story. It is also it's ancient. Let me try and find some of the sources for it. So this does not take away from your point. I just find it interesting that this idea of using the woman for the most horrendous of crimes and blaming the man for it is something that is older than older than the West, I suppose I should say.
No. That's
or
Western
older
myth.
than the Western older than the Western legal
Greek.
system.
Why don't you say older than Christ?
Yeah.
It's a Greek myth.
That's a good way. Yeah, older than
But
Christ.
the Greeks absolutely condemned her. Only the moderns say that it's perfectly okay for women to do that. Only the moderns came up with this idea. This is a Marxist idea. The Marxist idea is based on kind of let's call it a Gnostic heresy, an update of the Gnostic heresy. The Gnostic heresy is a first century heresy which said that that the God of the Old Testament was actually the devil, and that Jesus overthrew him, and that all the rules proposed by God in the Ten Commandments are actually evil, and that you're supposed to be proud, and that you're supposed to be a murderous, and you're supposed to be adulterous, and you're supposed to covet your neighbor's stuff, because that's where all the fun is. Now, there were not many Gnostics back in the day. They were not well known. Simon the magician, who's mentioned in the Gospel, is one of them, and according to reports that I trust, one of the apostles, I believe it was the Apostle Paul, prayed while Simon the magician was flying over Rome on an aerial contraption that he had concocted to prove he was a god, and the prayers caused the contraption to collapse, and he fell to the ground and pancaked and broke all his bones and died. Pardon me for laughing, but I just love it when our magic is stronger than the magic of the witches. So the Gnostics believe in what's called moral inversion. They think that it's any common man, any one of the unwashed masses can be good because it's good. But it takes a true genius who have true insight to see that evil is good and that good is evil. And evil is good because they're more tolerant than good people are. Good people are judgmental. Good people think. And thinking and using reason is a thought crime. That's so whenever the Gnostic of the modern sort, they're not really Gnostics because they're not Christian, but they're of their camp, they're of their spirit. Whenever Gnostic of the modern sort sees any outrageous crime or sin, uh, past or present, they say, "Oh no, let's look at it from their point of view. They're the victim," and because the normal morality of sane people is based on prioritizing good and evil and preferring the good over the evil. And there are certain times when you have to do dangerous or even unpleasant things for some higher good. You have to make sacrifices of the lower to the higher. What the Gnostic does is he puts the lowest at the highest, makes himself, his selfish desires, primary, and says whatever I need to do to satisfy my selfish desires is paramount. And so, in order to excuse that selfishness, he has to find some reason why not just he personally is oppressed, but the entire world system oppresses him. And so he tends to buy into something like a Marxist point of view that says that all capitalists oppress all proletarians, or to a feminist point of view that says that all men oppress all women and that they're enemies of each other. Or there are certain racists and anti-racists who think that all whites oppress all blacks, and then it's actually built into our genetics that the white race has the evil gene and the black race does not have that gene. All these are just variations of the same Marxist theme. It's the theme that that if you're evil, it proves you're good. If you're suffering, it proves that you're morally superior, and therefore you are excused from all moral scruples in exacting whatever retaliation you wish to exact for any crime, past or present, real or imaginary. So when feminists don't actually, if a feminist says that she would like to vote, I'm willing to listen to that argument with reasonable calm. But once she says that wants to, I don't know, kill children on the grounds that her femininity gives her the right to kill a child, to commit murder, I go, okay, at that point you're not a feminist, you're just a witch, you're just a Satan worshiper.
Yep. No arguments from me.
Not that all witches are Satan worshippers, mind you, but all people who kill children are basically are doing the work of Satan.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
But I'll point out that even my atheist friends who don't believe in God a bit still think that human life is sacred and we shouldn't kill each other within a system of ordered liberty. That the point of civilization is to protect the weak. That's why we have civilized behaviors. That's why we have laws. It's not to protect the strong. The strong are already protected. They don't need the law. It's the weak. It's the weak we have to look out for. And who's weaker than a baby in the womb? Who's in more need of nourishment? Who is in more need of protection and love?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the thing that ended up convincing me eventually about abortion, I was convinced in I became, I should say, anti-abortion, since I don't really like the pro-life, pro-choice language. I became anti-abortion in high school.
That language is deceptionally misleading. Pardon me for interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, you're correct. But anyway, this was in high school that I became convinced of the anti-abortion position, actually because of a speaker at my school. But one thing that I realized as time went on, talked with more people, that the pro-abortion arguments were not just morally repugnant and disgusting. It was it was and is still kind of unbelievable to me just how bad the arguments are. Like there is nothing there. There is no intellectual tradition behind it. There is no logic to any of the arguments. They are so bad. Like, it's insane to me.
Yeah.
How bad the pro-abortion arguments are.
That's why they have to change the names of things, because they can't call it by themselves. If there was someone who said, "Look, I'm a woman, I feel that the baby inside me is a trespasser, and I would like to kill them, and I believe I have a right to kill," and if she spoke in that terminology, I'd have more respect for her than someone who says, "This is a woman's health issue," because I go, "Well, gee, it's not really healthy for the baby, is it? In fact, it's abortion is the only medical procedure where if it is flubbed, everyone lives. It's not. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with women's health or reproductive rights or anything else. All that is mere falderall. All that is mere uh, calling a thing calling a thing by the name it doesn't deserve. Calling a thing by the opposite of what it really is.
Mm. Word
The
Yeah,
the
it
games.
was one of
Mm.
those. Go ahead, Ben.
it's word ga- yeah, it's word games. It's deceptive. It's deceptive labeling. It's calling black white and night day. I mean, it's not just calling black green. It's not calling a thing by a different word that's unrelated. It's calling a thing by the opposite of what it is. Half the babies killed are women, or actually more than half, because many people kill girl children before they'll kill boy children because out of a sexual preference. Uh, so if it was a woman's health issue, then you'd want to protect the health of the women who are about to be born, right? Because they're girls, they're female.
Hmm. It's a weak rhetoric point, sadly, because people will just say, "Well, it's still the mother who's the important thing," which we of course will say, "Yeah, but you're missing the point here. It's still a child being murdered."
Well,
Uh,
look, in the Roman law, there was a thing called the paterfamilias, which allowed a father to discipline his children up to and including killing them if they disobeyed him. Is anyone willing to grant me that law under our modern laws just because I'm a father?
no.
If not, how come you're granting the mother the ability to kill children that she doesn't want to live? And if you say it's illegal for her to drown them in the bathtub at 2 years old, what makes it legal to drown them at 1 year old, or at birth, or 10 minutes before birth, or 15 minutes before birth? I mean, how women keep saying you can't tell me what to do with my body, and I say, okay, fine. My my body includes my hand, which includes my gun hand, which includes my gun arm, which includes me shooting people. And if you tell me not to shoot people, if I feel like shooting people randomly on the street, are you going to tell me what to do with my body? And they can say, well, no, but the baby's inside my body, and I can say, okay, fine. Let's say you were on an airplane and you found a stowaway. You have a legal right to expel trespassers. Can you throw a man out of an airplane and when it's in midair and kill him because he's a trespasser? I don't believe any civilized law allows people to do things like that. Okay,
Yes. Even the
and
most hardened pirates would take a stowaway as an opportunity for slave labor.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
there's even among the most degenerate of any society out there, at the very least they see the value of a human's labor, much less that. And for a farmer or even for a lot of these people, if they had a large family group working together, they could pull themselves out of the poverty that people use as an excuse. But no, they do not even have that.
and there are there are certain wild animals that will kill their own young, uh, but none of them considered to be a moral right. You know,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
the other part of the rhetoric that is so abominable is that these women are betraying the fundamental thing that makes women female. The thing that makes a woman and not a man is that she can bear children rather than father children. That's what the distinction between the sexes is.
That's
And
right.
just as an aside, I find it infinitely amusing that a week ago, Supreme Court justices could not tell the difference between male and female without consulting a biologist, whereas now you can tell whether or not who, according to the left, who has a right to speak or not to speak on this issue instantaneously by glancing at them, by discerning which sex they are and saying one sex has the right to speak on the issue and the other does not.
It's true.
Here's what's even more amusing: the court that decided Roe v. Wade was all white men. The court that decided this is a mixture of two or three women, and so on. So that argument won't fly. You can't make our desire not to have you kill a child out to be an act of oppression. That's a Marxist approach to things, which makes the world, divides the world into devils and angels, and that the devils oppress the angels, and that anything the devils do is regarded as oppression. Even if the angels are in the majority, even if the angels have legal privileges and perquisites that the others don't have, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I myself believe that this decision affected our entire legal system negatively because it derailed the methodology courts used for deciding what was lawful and what was not lawful. It it altered the balance of power between the judicial and the legislative. It made the legislative weaker, and the legislative kind of went along with that because they didn't want the political headache. It changed the moral character of the Americans. It made us less self-reliant, more bloodthirsty, and more callous, particularly our women. Our women used to be, back in the day, American women used to be a lamp to the world, showing the moral character of where we were supposed to go, where the straight and narrow was. And that was lost. Women became witches, became whorish, became degenerate. And I noticed the sexual revolution was about the same time. In the sexual revolution, what its primary purpose was to dissolve the family structure, which dissolves civilization. It inches us closer to tyranny. So it is as if there was a literal curse brought upon us by this decision. Now, if that curse lifts, we might have a moral awakening like you have never seen before in this country. Except I say that, of course, knowing full well that every 2 or 3 generations there's a moral awakening. The Victorians, who are always dismissed as being overly moral, were a reaction against the very loose and horrible behavior of their previous generation, where men were sleeping with whores and having bastard children that they were just abandoning to their own devices. No matter what you think about Victorian hypocrisy or whatnot, at least they were trying to enforce a moral order that was healthy and useful and good for people to live under. I would not mind at all having those days back compared to the days we're living in, where I can't even trust the Disney Channel to show my children things that are not perverted, not sexually perverted.
Yep. And people will
And I
make.
blame, and I blame Roe v. Wade. Call me crazy, but I think it is. I think it is a set of events that was set in motion by this bad decision.
I have nothing against that theory. I actually will adopt it as something I believe in. It certainly does. I've been doing research on something called what I'm calling the spiritual crisis of the 1970s, where you see things like Vatican II on the Catholic side and the rise of soulless megachurches on the Protestant side. And you have things like Vatican II, the infiltration of communists into every religious position they could find. Um, but also things like Roe v. Wade and other laws that interfere.
Doesn't it look like a curse? Doesn't it look like some heavenly power or hellish power said, "There's no cloud over your nation. All your moral decisions are going to go wrong." That you make as a group, nationally speaking.
Absolutely.
You're going to lose all your wars. You're going to not know right from wrong. You're going to not know. You're going to not know why communism is bad. You're going to not. You're not going to understand why tyranny is bad. You're going to start liking it.
Yep. I have no argument with that. You know, it's absolutely true. I also know from some stuff that Vox uncovered that there were historians who would discuss that in the 1800s and whatnot, Victorian age and before, that the end result of a pagan civilization was often child sacrifice, which they considered so horrible they would not discuss it in detail except to acknowledge it.
Yeah. Yeah. The devil hates children, and even if you don't believe in the devil, just the psychological reality of the fact that you're willing to betray your humanity. If you're a woman, you're willing to betray your maternity. If you're a father, you're willing to betray your paternity. You're willing to betray everything that makes you uniquely human for the sake of selfishness. It's not even to keep the sun lit up or to keep the crops growing. It's just so you can have sex out of wedlock. There's no other purpose for this behavior. That that has to change everything you do. That influences your whole worldview. You know.
Yep.
So if you don't believe in the devil and you don't think this is a curse, you might as well believe it's the same as, because you get the same result psychologically, even if you don't believe in the spirit world. It still poisons every part of the public discussion. It still poisons every decision you make as a national group. I was willing to believe this would come in my lifetime, but I didn't think it would until I saw it. Even when this came out, I thought it might be fake when it first came out. I couldn't believe it's such good news. I couldn't believe it. And it also shows that the people on the left, and I use the word left deliberately. I'm not saying they're liberals. I knew some liberals when I was young. Liberals believed in things like the free market and in free speech. They just were afraid of big business. Okay? That's not who is on the left these days. On these days, the left are all in favor of Disney. They're all in favor of Google. They're all in favor of mega corporations. They're all in favor of the government censoring your speech. They're not free speech at any cost. The liberals in my youth were. These guys are not those guys. These guys hate those guys. They're the enemy of those guys. All they did was hollow them out and wear them like a skin suit, like something from Silence of the Lambs. Okay? These guys, these leftists, once you adopt the principle that human life is of no value, what are you willing to stop at? Where's your brakes then? Where's your moral scruples? If you're willing to kill children and sell their organs for the sake of medical convenience, who are you not willing to kill?
That's right.
I mean, any other person, any other stranger, is actually, you have less of a moral obligation to them than to your own child, because they're a stranger to you. Even your brother is not your child. Your brother is not dependent upon you. You see? Now, here's what changed my mind about abortion, because when I was young, I was a very logical thinker, and I could not see any logical way to distinguish between the two arguments, because one side said it's a human being, and the other side said it was not. And the guys who said it was not said, well, look, he doesn't show any of the behaviors of a human being, because before a certain stage of development, there's no brain activity. There's no, it's no different from an animal. You can kill an animal morally. So, and I said, okay, these two people disagree at an axiom, and logic only tells you whether or not a conclusion is in agreement with an axiom. It can't tell you which axiom to pick. So I said, okay, I don't know how to pick between these two things. And that was my attitude. Up until I was a father. Then I saw a radar photo, a sonograph picture of my child in my wife's womb. And this was an early picture, long before the 15 weeks we were discussing in the Texas law. And I looked and I saw a baby. I saw my baby playing with his toes. And a bolt of hatred went through me like I've never experienced before, because I'm not a very emotional man. It jarred up and down my spine. It lit my brain on fire. And I said, they lied to me. All of them lied and said this is not a baby. They all know it. They're all lying. Because if they weren't lying, they wouldn't use a word like fetus. Fetus refers to a stage of development, not to a species of being. It would be like talking about the second story of a building and without talking about the building. It's a stage. It's a developmental stage of what? Not a fox, not a duck, not an oak tree. An unborn human being is a human being. You can't get around it.
Right.
Then I said to myself, okay, you're an unemotional Vulcan. Don't let your anger decide for you. Why in the world is your reaction so strong? And I realized immediately why it was. Because whether or not the child can speak yet, whether or not the child can think yet, whether or not there's a heartbeat yet, is one question. But it's not the question that decides whether or not you may kill it. The question that decides whether or not you may kill it is, what is my duty toward this creature? Am I the father? Am I supposed to protect it? Yes or no? If I am supposed to protect it, at what stage, at what point, at what date does that duty come upon me? Does it come upon me when my wife is pregnant? Am I allowed to say, dear, don't smoke a cigarette because you might hurt the unborn child? I would say it does. The duty to protect your child has to arise at any moment when a threat to the child can arise. You would not let a pregnant woman be exposed to chemicals that cause birth defects if you were going to be, if you, that would be an act of negligence at least, if not a criminal act, right?
Right.
That means the duty to protect a child has to vest, has to be a real duty before the child is born, because things that happen to the child before it's born can affect the outcome of the child. Well, if it's wrong to inflict a birth defect willfully on a child, because I could introduce a chemical to my wife's womb that would cause the child to be born blind. That's not difficult to do. Is that moral for me to do? Am I allowed as a father, whose duty is to protect the child, to blind my child before birth?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Well, by the same logic, if I can't introduce birth defects, then I can't introduce the birth defect known as death. If I cannot maim the child, I cannot maim the child to the point where the child stops living. I can't say, well, the dead child was never born, so therefore he's not a dead child. If the thing is alive, it's alive. It's not potentially alive. It's either alive or not alive. If it's
Right.
alive and it's a member of my species, then it's a human being. If it's my offspring, it's my child. Again, by the same argument, if you lived in a fairy tale world where a witch could turn a prince into a frog, would it be morally proper to kill that frog, even if you knew the witch's spell would break in 9 months and he would turn into a prince again? Even if he was not a prince, not a human being, during those moments, is it morally permissible to kill him? If you're the prince's loyal retainer, you've sworn an oath to protect him? Even if you haven't sworn an oath, is it okay to kill a human who's been turned into something else if he's going to turn back?
Absolutely not.
How could it be? It's no different from killing a guy when he's asleep. When you go, well, man's a rational animal, but he's in a dreamless sleep, therefore he's not being rational, therefore he's not a man. Smother with a pillow. How is any of this murder different from me wanting to kill my rich uncle so I can get his money? Well, it's convenient for me. Well, I mean, if you're not a nephew, you can't decide whether or not I should have that ability. You're not a poor nephew like I am. You don't understand my poverty. You can't say anything. I mean, can you imagine how insane that would sound?
Absolutely.
For knocking off rich uncles? It's madness. Their arguments are madness. And the reason why they're madness is because they're evil. And they know it. They act like guilty people. They scream rather than discuss things. And when they scream, they change the subject to something else, like gay marriage or Nazism or to a woman's body. Look, no one's telling you what to do with your body or not to do with your body. Okay? All we're saying is you can't kill anyone. That includes your own children.
Yeah, I had a similar reaction to you when I had, I mentioned the speaker who came in high school. Now, it was a similar reaction of when I kind of figured out the truth. If you had asked me about abortion before that point, I hadn't really thought about it. It was a thing I would have said, are you against it? And I would go, oh, probably, maybe not in cases of rape, I don't know. And then after seeing that, it just became like there was this anger where you're going, people are lying to me. They're just lying. Like, outright. They are lying to me.
Let me tell you the
it
true
became... it became kind of difficult to talk to people who were pro-abortion. Like, I actually had to sort of take some time and gain control over my emotion in that area, because I would get angry in the discussions where it's like, no, I don't think you're being reasonable. I don't think you have a reasonable point to make. I cannot see the other side of this position. I can't do it. I had to take some time.
It's not just them putting a lie on me that angered me. Here's what angered me. They were trying to get me to do it. When my first child was in the womb, we went to a doctor, and he said, "Oh, I think your child's going to be born with spina bifida. Why don't you discuss your options? Death is a good idea." Now, at that time, I was an atheist, so I had no religious scruples against this. But my wife was a Christian, and she would not even consider it. She said, no. She said, absolutely no, we're not going to discuss that. Now, I did not launch myself across the desk and grab the doctor by the throat and strangle him to death for daring to say to my face, why don't you kill your child, Mr. Wright? So it's not just that these people are lying to me. They're lying to me to get me to drench my own hands in the blood of my own innocent children. They're lying to me to get me to participate in their crime. How
Yes.
could I not be angry? It is only by a great effort of my Vulcan cold heart that I can go, well, logically, if I have a duty to protect the child, then the ontological status of the child is not an issue here. And if you say I don't have a duty to protect my child, then why do you have truancy laws? A truancy law means I have a duty, a positive duty, to send my child to school for his education and benefit. Do I have a duty to educate a child but not to feed him? Do I have a duty to feed him and not to spare his life if I wish to kill him? If I have a duty to feed and protect my child, killing him is not an option. And if I kill him in the womb, he's going to be dead for all the rest of his life. So I can't have a duty to care for a child after he's born if I have the ability to eliminate him before he is born, because that abrogates the duty. Now, of course, none of these people even have the word duty in their vocabulary. That is no part of their argument. Their argument is, I feel oppressed, therefore I may do whatever I wish with my body. And they'll weep. They'll go, oh, it's a difficult decision for a woman. Well, no, it's not a difficult decision for a woman. If you were having a wart removed, like I mentioned before, coming to my backyard wart removal clinic, where I have an unlicensed, where I'll put you under nitrous oxide without ever checking your body weight. If it was just removing a wart, you wouldn't think about it twice. The only reason why it's a difficult decision is because you have to steel yourself for committing the worst type of murder. Because like I said before, some murders are worse than others. Killing a stranger is bad. Killing your brother is worse because it's also kinslaying. Killing your father is worse because that's patricide. Killing your wife is worse than that. That's exoricide. But killing your child? A dad killing a child is bad. A mother killing a child? That's worse. Because matrimony, because motherhood, is sacred. It's holy. It's not to be demeaned. And yet we've demeaned that as thoroughly as any culture in history. We owe Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. We owe the Aztecs an apology.
Yep. I've been listening to streams and people talking about this in preparation for this, and just to see how it is. One man, academic agent, described how he turned against abortion when he, like you, saw his child on the ultrasound. Another person is flip flopping on it, but ultimately she is against abortion. The For myself, I've always been against abortion. But sometimes they're like, well, what about rape? But now at this point, I even say, at no circumstances should any abortion ever be performed, even if it costs the life of the mother. And it just might under the abortionist knife anyway. There's a great theme that once somebody is faced with the reality of their children living or existing, of their fatherhood, of their motherhood, and even I might say there might be some who saw their siblings and loved them and thus turned against abortion. They turn against abortion. They say, because I have seen this, because I recognize the human life within my wife or within myself, I cannot abide this any longer.
I will point out that there are laws on the books in some states requiring that any woman contemplating an abortion be shown an ultrasound of the baby. And the courts of law have struck those laws down as being against the ruling in Roe v. Wade. Do I need to repeat that?
No.
The rule
yes.
making it so you make an informed decision so that you are aware of the moral implications of your action is opposed by the activists who want our kids dead. Now, I also think that it doesn't matter what price we pay for this. This has to be done. Even if we lose the midterms, fine. That will mean nothing compared to this. How bad this is. Let me read once again from the court. I really was impressed with Justice Alito. I'm like a fanboy of his now, because his reasoning is so clear and so crisp and so very lawyerly. Here's what he says. We do not pretend to know how our political system or society will respond to today's decision overruling Roe and Casey. And even if we could foresee what will happen, we would have no authority to let that knowledge influence our decision. We can only do our job, which is to interpret the law, applying longstanding principles of stare decisis, and decide this case accordingly. We therefore hold that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey must be overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion must be returned to the people and to their elected representatives. To which I say, amen.
Amen. And-
So that
yeah.
argument that you mentioned about seeing, or it's not an argument, it's I should say that phenomenon that you and Ben
Call it an
mentioned.
epiphany. Call it an epiphany.
Epiphany.
My eyes were opened. I was blind and my eyes were open. I realized they all lied to me about whether my kid was
Yeah,
was
seeing
alive.
the person. So here's an interesting thing. This is sort of what happened to me. It's a very common experience, right? At my high school, that was the thing that viscerally convinced me, is seeing the images, basically, the piles of bodies, right, that are piled up outside of abortion clinics, right, that they pile up these tiny bodies. And this is the thing that
I hate to
made
interrupt,
me...
but the American Civil Liberties Union enacts law cases to prevent volunteers from burying those bodies and giving the children names and headstones. They wish to deny the dead children Christian burial.
Yeah, so that, which, by the way, one of the many reasons that I could never ever, even if I agree with something that the ACLU does, I'll put it to you this way, if the ACLU volunteered to represent me, I would turn them down. Even if it were a position I agreed with, because that's satanically evil. But going back to that idea, so it was a similar thing where that speaker showed it, and that was the thing that made me go like, wow, I was like, people were just lying to me. And there was a movie that came out relatively recently, I want to say in the last few years, and there was a scene in it that kind of fascinated me. You almost certainly haven't heard of it because it's a movie that I highly doubt that you would care about, knowing your tastes in science fiction and fantasy. But it was called Lady Bird, and it was about a girl who went to a Catholic school. It got very good reviews. I even think Bishop Robert Barron commented on it, if I recall at the time. I did not watch it, but I remember a scene, because it had been talked about in a couple of places, where they had a speaker. She went to a Catholic school, and it was about her life growing up. And the speaker shows the images of the aborted baby parts and goes like, isn't that terrible or whatever? And the main character stands up and says, but just because it looks bad doesn't mean that it actually is bad, right? And she gets sent to the principal's office for this. And I heard this, and it did make me stop and think for a moment. No, don't get me wrong, not that I think that that's any sort of reasonable argument, but it made me stop and think for a moment. So what was it about what I saw that convinced me, right? Like, because her argument is that, well, just because they look like little humans, it doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong, which I guess is technically true, if missing the point.
Technically, it's true and missing the point. I have a friend who is a black man, and he said he was convinced about abortion very simply. And when he was in school, when he was in college, he said, I began to think of if there was a single argument about abortion that didn't also apply to black men.
Yes.
You can look at them and say, hey, they're not human. Their skins are dark.
Now, my first thought was, in my high school, if a student had said that, they would not have gotten in trouble for it, for one thing. So this did not jive with my experience at Catholic school. It jives with media creations of Catholic school as places where you're not allowed to ask questions, and you're not allowed to, question the orthodoxy, or else you get in trouble, which is total nonsense. Complete nonsense.
They're criticizing us for being orthodox. At least our orthodoxy is written down, and you can abide by it. Their rules are just as ironclad, but they change from moment to moment.
Oh yeah, the main difference, though, like in this case, what they are trying to criticize, so I gather, by implication, because they never directly state it. Because as soon as they directly state it, you could pin it down, and you could point out how ludicrous it is. But, it's a general thing with Catholic schools. Like, you can't question this, except that wasn't my experience at Catholic school at all. You could ask whatever questions you wanted of the theology teacher. You could disagree with gay marriage. You could disagree with anything. He was a brilliant man. He convinced me about a lot of things in Christianity and the Catholic faith. And you could 100% question everything, and you wouldn't have gotten in trouble for asking a question. If a student had said that to the abortion speaker at my school, they would not have gotten in trouble for it.
Of course
The
not.
abortion speaker would have answered
Look,
them.
there's basically just a prejudice in all English-speaking countries against the Catholic Church because England broke away from the Church long ago, and to justify the breakaway, they had to, either invent or exaggerate, and they had to give their side of the argument. And one of the things they decided on was simply the false to facts assertion that medieval schools and that medieval thinking prevented free inquiry, which, when ironically, medieval schools invented free inquiry. If you look at all the informal logical errors and they're listed, they're going to all have Latin names, like argumentum ad hominem, argumentum ad baculum, argumentum ad verecundium. The reason why they all have Latin names is because the medieval schoolmen are the ones who named them, so they could learn to avoid them. And you were expected in a medieval school to be able to support the propositions of the Summa Theologica if you were studying theology, or you were studying logic, or you were studying rhetoric, or you were studying mathematics. You were expected to answer these questions. I was in a debate with someone, and he said, "Oh, well, in the Middle Ages, were you free to question whether or not God existed in a medieval school?" I said, "Well, yes, you were. The concept of academic freedom is a medieval invention, so that these people could conduct inquiries into all the questions of their theology to come up with certain answers that they would then debate for 100 years or 200 and write them all down." So
Yep.
this idea that the Christians are anti-logic or anti-science or against freedom is an invention of all people, good old Karl Marx and his epigenes in the late Victorian era. It's a Victorian era prejudice that has merely been carried along by the modern media. The modern media didn't make it up. Marx basically made it up. In order to make his program of kill the rich and take their stuff seem like it was morally acceptable, he had to give a reason to show that modern progress always led to Marxism, and the ancients were always, every older generation was inferior to the prior generation. The idea that they had their strengths and weaknesses, which might be the same or might be the different of ours, never occurs to a modern progressive. The progressives believe in progress because they believe everything evolves from worse to better to best. They don't ever look at history
Yep.
and
Yeah.
see that sometimes things change and sometimes things get worse and sometimes things get better, and often things get better in one area, like technology, and get worse in another, like morality.
Yeah,
Even myself, an avowed Protestant, does not at any point doubt the how do I want to put it, the scholarship of men of Aquinas's college and whatnot. And even when I have questions about Catholic theology, what I will do is often see what Aquinas has to say on it, just because if the foundations of what I call my church, though I will say that perhaps there is more to the house church and the Protestant church in history than meets the eye. But if Aquinas, who is in the background of Martin Luther was a very well educated man. He was a professor. He taught to, his local, I forget what he was, baron or duke or whatever he was. If Aquinas does not have an answer for it, if he cannot explain it or talk about it, then perhaps it is either a new invention, in which case I will safely ignore it, or it is something that is wrong that has somehow not been weeded out of that particular priest or media figure otherwise.
I will hasten to point out that the progressives regard Protestantism as just as backward as they regard Catholicism. Though I think they hate Catholics more because we're older. But Marx's theory was merely to take the Darwinist idea that successive ages always produce forms more fit to survive than the prior ages, but he takes it in a direction Darwin never took it. Darwin didn't say things went from worse to better. He just said things change.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it gets colder and so your bears get heavier fur, that doesn't mean heavier fur is better than lighter fur. And likewise, if you have a social institution that does one thing, it's for one purpose, and it doesn't fit the current needs of society, that doesn't mean that it's worse because it's old. You see what I'm saying here?
Yes.
The whole progressive idea is merely being used as a trick. And people say, well, we used to keep slaves and now we don't, and we used to allow babies to live and now we don't. So killing babies is part of progress. And they say, and they've actually said this, they say if we turn back Roe v. Wade, if we turn back the clock, progress in other areas will also turn backwards. We'll go back to keeping slaves. You know?
Good luck trying to
There's the
convince him
great
in that.
line.
Ugh.
There's the
Show me
great line in Lewis's Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I've seen your progress. We call it going bad in Narnia.
Lewis, let's just pause a moment to admire Lewis and his brilliance. So. And with that, I myself have run out of things to say. Did you have any other legal questions for your guest?
No, but let us go through the comments real quick. Sadly, we are not at the point of super chats yet, but someday I have dreams, high hopes. So we have some greetings. Greeting Carl, greeting Vanessa, greetings Taryn Blade. I don't think I'd seen you before. Video Mirador, DJ Schreffler, who I think plays Montrose in our game. Hello, Kursova. Hello, Artanon Studios, Underworld Dream, and Aaron VT, who is a supporter of Pinkerton's Ghost. Welcome doubly. He says, can confirm vis-a-vis SCOTUS opinions as a former PhD student. Some are logical to the point of tedium. Roe is BS in the skin of a SCOTUS ruling. DJ Schreffler asks you about Marbury versus Madison.
The decision making in Marbury and Madison was rather elliptical, and I'm not sure I agree with the holding, but that was basically the case where the court arrogated it to itself the right to be the court of last resort and to establish what was and was not constitutional. Now, I'll point out that even that decision, however, did not free the other branches from their duties also to uphold the Constitution. So, I think Marbury versus Madison was dubious, but I don't think it needs to be revisited.
Very good. Let's see here. Carl regales against abortion. Abortion isn't murder; it's a hit job against a baby. Way worse. And DJ Schreffler agrees with you. There is homicide, voluntary, involuntary, and praiseworthy. Bradford Walker says, this is one of the big reasons I support things like Imperium Press. Imperium Press does good work. They're publishing some stuff from rightward-leaning figures. I don't know if they do fiction, but they've certainly done some excellent nonfiction. Their republishing of anti-modern classics is vital to the successful destruction of the satanic world and the rebuilding of Christendom. And then he goes on to say, Patriarcha and the ancient city alone is huge, the latter covering how the family as an institution actually works. I have been meaning to pick up Patriarcha, but other things get in the way. Fiona Wolf says, why yes, I use days off to listen live if possible. My parents quit smoking when Mom found out she was pregnant with me. Teamwork and better for their lungs. Let's see here.
But that also speaks to the point that you have a duty to protect the child from even before the child's born. If you have a duty to protect the child, that means you can't take a deliberate step to kill the child in the womb. That's merely forbidden. It's merely absolutely forbidden.
Absolutely. Video Mirador says, yeah, La Cité Antique is a very interesting book. I will pick that up. I am forever growing my library. It is a madness. It is a dream. Fiona Wolf says, in my honest opinion, most do abortions to maintain a certain lifestyle. It is abhorrent. No one has a personal responsibility because social mores are that degraded.
That speaks to my example of the rich uncle. I mean, I want to kill my rich uncle so I can get the inheritance, so I can continue in the lifestyle to which I'm accustomed. I mean, is that how is that considered to be moral?
If the wine aunt supports abortion, can I postnatal her and end her decadent lifestyle? Uh, no, I cannot. Video Mirador says, yeah, the Anglosphere is very insufferable about Catholicism in Catholic countries. I would say that it's died down quite a bit, along with the degrading of the Anglican Church, which is so boring. It is one of the few sermons that I have almost fallen asleep to, which I did not
I
even. Excuse me.
I had a friend who was an Anglican who could not follow the Anglicans when they decided to go for homosex, and he said I can't. It goes against traditional Catholic teaching, church teaching, and his whole church, like in one move, moved over to being Catholics. They just came under the jurisdiction of the Catholic Church just in one with the stroke of a pen. It was an amazing thing. But what happened to him was he saw his church had turned against church teaching.
Hmm.
So, and mine, for all its flaws, we still maintain the same core. We don't even allow for contraception. So,
Absolutely.
so
And
I mean,
it's, yeah. Sorry.
so we're not gonna allow for this because there's people saying, hey, excuse me, this has nothing. This is actually not a religious issue. This is just a human issue. Mothers killing babies is something that's so abhorrent that everyone recognizes it's wrong.
Yep.
Everyone recognizes that's why these guys always change their language when they talk about it. That's why they always change the subject. That's why they're always on attack mode because they can't defend it.
That's
You
right.
know,
It was one of the reasons why Rome burned down Carthage. They sacrificed children to their altars. And if the
Amen.
woman cried overmuch, well, that sacrifice would have to be done again now, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
this
have a
whole
piece
thing,
of
this whole thing is a big monument to Moloch, the devil, the demon.
Mm.
I have a piece of revisionist history that I just heard spoken in an interview. So there's an actor whose name is Michael Mando, and his character was just killed off in a show that I'm a fan of, Better Call Saul. So he is.
Hey, the
Oops,
thought
spoiler.
police are in the background. They're coming to arrest us. I hear the siren.
Oh no. So this is that means that doesn't matter at all. What mattered to me though was something he mentioned in an interview. He talked about how it was very important to him that he was a Hispanic man, and Hispanic. I should say I don't remember if he used Latino, by the way, just like of that race, who was portrayed in. I think he even might have used the phrase brown skinned, as if that's the really important thing, but uh that was portrayed in a positive way because the show was a lot about drug dealers and things like that, and they were always portrayed so negatively in the show. He was portrayed heroically before his death, and he died in an act of self-sacrifice and love. And he's not wrong; it was a great death scene. But what stood out to me in the interview was that he said they're always portraying the Hispanics wrong. He goes, for example, I read an article talking negatively about the Aztecs and the Mayans, and they said the Aztecs sacrifice people, but what they didn't say. Now, this is the first time I have ever heard this, by the way, but he claimed now what they didn't share, implying that the people who shared this article were libeling, the noble native peoples of Mexico and Central America, that the Aztecs played a sport, and then the loser would sacrifice them, or the winner, I can't even remember which one it was such a wild theory, would sacrifice themselves intentionally on the temple for their people to secure, favor from the gods. But they didn't tell you about that part. Well, they didn't tell you about that part because I have never ever heard that before, and I have researched the Aztecs in the past. That is a wild theory. I'm sure it has been brought up before, but I always thought they sacrificed captives.
Yes.
Yeah, taking their
So,
flower wars, or children
yeah.
whose skins are then flayed and where it is skins. The more the little girls cried, the more rain was supposed to come.
Mm.
So
They also
apparently
wiped
the
offal.
new
They also wiped shit into their hair, offal into their hair to show their humility.
Yeah, apparently that's the new
And ate
the
human
new
flesh.
propaganda around the Aztecs is that they were actually nobly sacrificing themselves
It's the
after
Gnostic
sports.
it's the Gnostic inversion I spoke of before. They always try to side with whoever is wickedest and most evil to make him look good.
Which is funny. Can I say something really quick?
This is my beloved wife.
Which is funny
Welcome.
because the latest research is they just came out in the last couple of weeks is that the Aztecs and some of the other South Americans were much, much worse than we thought they were. And anthropologists have found like huge graveyards full of sacrifice victims and stuff they hadn't even known about. But that wasn't what I wanted to say. I wanted to say I think I figured out the other day why in Carthage the woman wasn't supposed to cry. So the people thought they were supposed to sacrifice their children, but they didn't want to. So they were buying children from poor people. And if the woman cried, she didn't get the money. And I think the reason was that they were supposed to be pretending it was their kid. And if the real mom cried, they thought the gods would find out that they were lying. And what actually happened in Carthage is when they began to lose, they thought it was because they had been doing this dishonest thing and they went and killed their own kids.
Duh.
This is the behavior we should expect from the left over the next few months.
Absolutely.
And by the way, just as your pet lawyer, if anyone brings up stare decisis and says that even if it's bad law, Roe v. Wade should continue because it has continued,
Good.
merely say Brown v. Divorce Education, merely say Plessy v. Ferguson, merely say Dred Scott. If the law is not allowed to change in order to be brought into coherence with the Constitution, then there's no such thing as constitutional law.
Yep. I absolutely agree with you. Let's see here. Fiona Wolf is going for more chicken. What we will do now is close out. Anthony, will you give us the last word? Then I will say something, and then John, you will have the last word.
I've already said my last word. You guys take it from here.
Very good. Anthony, a short word for us, please.
I'll be hosting the show on Sunday. I have
Outstanding.
no idea what I'm going to do.
Wonderful.
That's all I can say.
The week after that will be our second episode where we discuss the Reformation of Protestants versus Catholics perspectives, I guess we'll say. Not so much a date, so much debate, so much as it's on a date. There we go. I am tenderly wooing Anthony away to the Protestant cause. He will be able to read his own Bible once more. I know that's false. Catholics can read
My
their Bibles
power
now.
has only grown stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. But we will be discussing the build-up and part of the Reformation, why it happened, the sort of like, how do I want to put it, the acceleration that happened, because things happened in less than 20 to 30 years, and all of us, my goodness, someone should get their thing checked out. It happened in 20 and 30 years, and all of a sudden everything everywhere is exploding. And there is actually quite an interesting pre-Reformation history, especially with Bible translations, as well as other people who try to reform it from the top down rather than from the bottom up, which is what the Reformation was. I think it'll be great. It'll be very educational. I will even have a PowerPoint. John C. Wright has many blogs, posts that you can enjoy. I believe you just finished your short story, The Wine Thirst of Comos.
Correct.
I've been looking forward to it. I find I enjoy them best when reading them all at once. Do you know you're working?
I enjoyed it very much.
Anthony enjoyed it. Is there any book you would like to promote at this time, sir?
I'm still working on my Star Quest book, and I promised my faithful readers that I will get back to No Wither and to Moth and Cobweb as soon as I get this project out of the way.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, sir. Look forward to the new Pinkerton's Ghost episode this week. The links for John C. Wright's blog, as well as his YouTube channel, The Voice of Reason, are below. Thank you all for listening, and God bless.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. There we go. We are no longer